They mocked the Deathworlder's weak arms. She bent their weapons like twigs. The third plasma rifle died with a pathetic whine, its crystalline power core flickering from brilliant azure to dull amber before going completely dark. Senior weapons instructor Zilax's secondary manipulator appendages twitched in frustration as he set the weapon aside with the others. 12 of the facility's finest combat rifles, all suffering from the same inexplicable power regulation failure. Status report, instructor? Azila's voice carried the clipped efficiency of someone who had been fielding increasingly urgent communications from the training command center. The facility's training coordinator moved between the diagnostic stations with practiced grace, her primary appendages dancing across holographic displays that showed nothing but cascading failure readings. 17 minutes until the next certification group arrives, Zilax replied, his voice tight with professional concern. These are Officer Candidate Batch 447. Their combat certification depends on successful completion of the advanced weapons protocols. Without functional rifles, they fail their final examination. Vexthul finished grimly from across the armory. The equipment specialist's usually pristine workstation looked like a technological battlefield, with weapon components scattered across analysis platforms and diagnostic screens painting everything in harsh red emergency lighting. I've run full molecular scans on all 12 units. The power cores are intact. The quantum targeting matrices show no degradation, and the plasma confinement chambers are operating within perfect parameters. Zilax lifted the nearest rifle, a Model 47X that had functioned flawlessly for 3 standard cycles. The weapon was a masterpiece of engineering. Its sleek form incorporated 7 different exotic alloys, each optimized for specific performance characteristics. The targeting system alone contained processing power that exceeded entire planetary defense networks from just 2 generations ago. Yet somehow, it had simply stopped working. Environmental factors? He asked, though he already knew the answer. The armory's atmospheric controls maintained perfect stability. Temperature, humidity, electromagnetic interference, even cosmic radiation levels were all within optimal ranges. Negative, Azila confirmed. I've checked everything twice. Gravitational variance, stellar radiation, even potential sabotage scenarios. All systems nominal. The soft pneumatic hiss of the maintenance access portal interrupted their discussion. A human emerged from the corridor, her appearance so unremarkable that Zilax almost dismissed her entirely. She wore the standard blue maintenance uniform, carried a simple toolbox that looked ancient compared to their diagnostic equipment, and moved with the casual confidence of someone handling routine work. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "Emma, Johnson, facility maintenance. Got a work order for some ventilation adjustments in here. But I can come back, if you're busy with something important." Zilax's attention was already returning to the diagnostic readings when something in her tone made him pause. There was an odd note in the human's voice when she said, "something important." Not dismissive exactly, but puzzled. "These are precision military weapons," he explained, perhaps more stiffly than necessary. "We're conducting emergency diagnostics on critical combat systems. The complexity involved requires—" "Oh, those." Emma stepped closer to the workstation, seemingly unconcerned by the warning lights and emergency protocols. "They're just stuck, aren't they?" The silence that followed was profound. Vexthul's manipulators froze mid-gesture over his analysis console. Azila's head turned with the mechanical precision of a targeting system acquiring a new threat. "Stuck?" Zilax repeated carefully. "These are Model 47X plasma rifles. They incorporate quantum phase power regulation, molecular-level targeting matrices, and 17 different safety protocols. They don't get stuck." Emma shrugged, setting down her toolbox. "I mean, I don't know much about the fancy bits, but I worked maintenance at the Kepler Station Industrial Complex before this assignment. We had plasma cutters that would do the exact same thing, work fine for months, then just quit. Usually meant something was out of alignment. Out of alignment, Vex Thul said slowly, as if testing the words for hidden meaning. These weapons are precision manufactured to tolerances measured in atomic widths. The probability of random misalignment is... Yeah, that's what the engineers on Kepler used to say too, Emma interrupted with a friendly laugh. Right up until I showed them the warped mounting brackets on the industrial units. Sometimes things just get bent a little, you know? Especially when they're working hard. Zilax felt something cold settle in his thoracic cavity. These rifles haven't been subjected to any unusual stress. They've been used only for standard training protocols, well within operational parameters. Uh-huh. Emma glanced at a wall chronometer. Look, I don't want to hold up your important work. Mind if I just do the ventilation maintenance while you guys figure out the technical stuff? I'll stay out of your way. But she didn't move to begin her assigned work. Instead, she lingered near the workstation, her eyes moving over the disabled weapons with the same casual attention she might give a leaky faucet. There was something profoundly unsettling about her complete lack of concern for the sophisticated technology that represented the pinnacle of their civilization's engineering achievement. The deadline is in 14 minutes, Azila said quietly. If we can't restore function to at least 6 units, the entire candidate batch fails, Zilax finished. 3 years of training reduced to failure because their most advanced weapons had developed some inexplicable malfunction that defied every diagnostic tool at their disposal. Emma was examining one of the rifles now, not touching it but looking at it with the same expression Zilax had seen maintenance workers use when evaluating a malfunctioning environmental system. You know, she said thoughtfully, this reminds me of a Tuesday back on Kepler. We had this whole bank of industrial equipment just quit working. Took the engineering team 2 days to figure out what I spotted in about 10 minutes. And what was that? Vex Thul asked, despite himself. Metal fatigue in the support structures. Tiny little stress fractures that didn't show up on the fancy scanners, but you could feel them if you knew what to look for. She gestured toward the rifles. These look like they've been working pretty hard too. All that energy cycling. The plasma confinement stress. I bet something's just gotten a little tweaked. The concept was so fundamentally absurd that Zilax couldn't immediately formulate a response. These weapons were constructed from materials that could withstand the heart of a star. The notion that they could be damaged by routine use was like suggesting that gravity might randomly stop working. But 12 minutes remained until the training deadline, and they had exactly 0 functional rifles. Our diagnostic protocols are quite comprehensive, Zilax said carefully, activating his personal scanner array. We employ quantum field analysis, molecular resonance scanning, and temporal flux measurement. If there were any structural anomalies, they would be immediately apparent. Emma nodded politely as holographic displays bloomed around the workstation, showing complex 3-dimensional models of weapon internals with measurement readings that flickered through 17 different spectrums of analysis. That's really impressive. Very thorough. Each scan represents analysis beyond the capabilities of entire research facilities from the previous technological generation, Vex Thul added with unmistakable pride. We can detect variance at the subatomic level. Cool, Emma said, and somehow managed to make it sound genuine rather than dismissive. So, what's it telling you about why they stopped working? Zilax gestured to the primary display. All readings indicate perfect structural integrity. Power core containment, optimal. Plasma channel alignment, within acceptable parameters. Targeting matrix coherence. Excellent. Yet somehow, none of the units will fire. Huh. Emma moved closer to the display, squinting at readings that required years of specialized training to interpret. What about the, She pointed vaguely at a section of the hologram. That bit there. Does it look right to you? That's the primary plasma confinement chamber, Azila explained with the patience of someone addressing a child. It operates on principles of controlled quantum field manipulation. The tolerances involved are beyond the precision of any manual manufacturing process. Right. But does it look right? Emma persisted. I mean, compared to when it was working. Zilax found himself actually examining the display more carefully. The confinement chamber readings were well within acceptable parameters, 99.7% efficiency, which was actually above average for units of this age. But something about the human's question nagged at him. The readings are excellent, he said finally. Okay, but what about the shape? The shape? Vexthul's voice rose half an octave. It's a quantum field construct. Shape is a primitive concept that doesn't apply to... Everything has a shape, Emma interrupted gently. Even if it's just the shape of how the energy flows. And energy flows different when something's pushing it in a direction it doesn't want to go. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Zilax realized he was staring at a human maintenance worker who had just described advanced field dynamics in terms that would have gotten her laughed out of any serious academic forum. Yet somehow her description wasn't entirely wrong. Our analysis indicates optimal field configuration, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Emma tilted her head, studying the hologram from a different angle. Back on Kepler, we had this plasma cutter that kept losing power. Engineering teams spent a week running diagnostics, couldn't find anything wrong. All the readings looked perfect. And? Azila prompted, despite herself. Turned out the whole mounting assembly had shifted about 3 millimeters. Not enough to trigger any alarms, but just enough to put stress on the plasma channels. Everything was working exactly like it was supposed to, but it was working harder than it should have been. 3 millimeters, Vexthul repeated slowly. You're suggesting that precision equipment, calibrated to atomic-level tolerances, could malfunction due to millimeter-scale displacement. I'm not suggesting anything, Emma said with another of those disarming shrugs. I'm just saying that's what happened on Kepler. Maybe it's totally different here. You guys are the experts. But her words had triggered something in Zilax's memory. He called up the maintenance logs, scanning through months of routine service records. There, 2 weeks ago, during a facility-wide seismic stabilization upgrade, all equipment had been temporarily relocated during the installation of new foundation support systems. Vexthul, he said quietly. Pull up the positioning verification data from the seismic upgrade. Already running it, his colleague replied, manipulators flying across control surfaces. All equipment was returned to original positions within documented tolerances, variance of 2.3 millimeters or less across all units. 2.3 millimeters, Emma repeated thoughtfully. Yeah, that'd do it. Probably not. Enough to break anything, but enough to make everything work just a little bit harder. And when equipment works harder, it wears out faster. Wear out? Azila's voice carried a note of something approaching disbelief. These are military-grade weapons. They're designed to function under combat conditions that would destroy lesser equipment. The materials involved are really strong, I bet, Emma finished. But even really strong things can get tired if you ask them to do too much for too long. Zilax found himself running increasingly detailed scans, looking for wear patterns that should have been impossible to detect without dismantling each weapon completely. The results were puzzling. There were micro-stress indicators in the plasma channels, tiny variations in field density that suggested strain. This is impossible, he murmured, but he was already initiating a complete recalibration sequence on the first rifle. Why? Emma asked. I mean, what makes it impossible? These weapons are constructed from materials that maintain structural integrity under conditions that would vaporize planetary surfaces, Vexathul explained with strained patience. The concept of metal fatigue simply doesn't apply. Okay, Emma said agreeably. So what's making them not work? And that, Zelax realized with growing unease, was exactly the question they couldn't answer. 7 minutes until deadline. The recalibration had failed, not catastrophically, but with the same mysterious power regulation issues as before. If anything, the weapon seemed to be performing worse than it had initially. I'm calling in Specialist Korvax from the Engineering Division, Vexthul announced, his manipulators working across multiple communication channels simultaneously. And requisitioning emergency consultation with the weapons development facility on Centauri Prime. Emma looked up from where she had been quietly examining the ventilation system. Is that going to take long? Because I'm pretty sure I know what's wrong. You know what's wrong with military weapons that represent the pinnacle of our technological achievement? Azila asked, her tone carefully neutral. Well, I think so. But you guys probably won't believe me. Try us, Zelax said grimly. At this point, he was willing to consider suggestions from anyone, even if they came from a species that his people had classified as technologically primitive, barely 50 standard cycles ago. Emma gestured toward the nearest rifle. They're bent. The statement hung in the air like an accusation. Zelax felt his secondary manipulators twitch involuntarily. Bent, he repeated. Yeah. Not much, but enough. See, when you moved all this equipment during the construction work, you probably put it back in almost exactly the right place. But almost exactly isn't the same as exactly. You know? And when these things fire, they generate a lot of force. That force has to go somewhere. The recoil dampening systems channel all kinetic energy into the quantum absorption matrix, Vexthul protested. There is no mechanical stress transferred to the weapon housing. Uh-huh. And what about the energy that doesn't get absorbed? I mean, no system is 100% efficient, right? Zelax found himself pulling up efficiency ratings almost without conscious thought. The recoil dampening systems operated at 99.97% efficiency, which was considered perfect by any reasonable standard. The remaining 0.03% of kinetic energy is well within tolerance parameters for all weapon components, he said. Sure, but 0.03% of a lot is still something. And if that something is getting channeled in a direction, it's not supposed to go because everything's positioned just slightly wrong. Emma shrugged. That's a lot of tiny pushes in the wrong direction, over and over. Specialist Korvax arrived with the dramatic flair of someone responding to a technical emergency. His personal diagnostic array was even more impressive than the standard armory equipment, featuring real-time molecular analysis and quantum field visualization capabilities that could map energy flow patterns at unprecedented resolution. Status, he demanded, already connecting his equipment to the weapon systems. 12 units with identical power regulation failures, Zelax summarized quickly. All diagnostic readings within normal parameters, but complete failure to maintain plasma coherence during firing sequences. Korvax's manipulators danced across his controls with professional efficiency. Running full spectrum analysis now. We'll have this resolved in... This is very odd. What? The plasma channels show micro-deformation patterns, extremely subtle but definitely present. It's as if they've been subjected to repeated low-level stress, but that should be impossible given the material composition and usage parameters. Emma cleared her throat politely. That's what I was trying to tell them. The weapons are bent. Korvax turned to examine the human with the expression of someone discovering an insect that had begun reciting poetry. "Bent," he said carefully. "Not much, but yeah. The construction work a couple weeks ago shifted everything just enough to put stress on the internal components when they fire. After a few thousand shots, that stress adds up. These weapons are constructed from neo-titanium alloys with quantum-reinforced molecular bonds," Korvax explained with elaborate patience. "They are literally stronger than the materials used in starship hulls. The concept of deformation from routine use is exactly what your fancy scanner just told you is happening," Emma interrupted gently. The diagnostic display was indeed showing stress patterns throughout the plasma channel systems, microscopic deformations that were somehow causing cascade failures in the quantum containment fields. The patterns were subtle enough to fall within normal variation tolerances, but consistent across all 12 weapons. "This is theoretically impossible," Korvax muttered, running even more detailed scans. "The energy requirements to deform these materials even microscopically would require industrial-level force application. Or lots and lots of little forces over a long time," Emma suggested. "Like water wearing away a rock, except faster because you're dealing with energy discharges instead of just water." "Water cannot wear away neo-titanium alloys," Vexthul said automatically. "No, but repeated energy discharges can, if they're going in the wrong direction. Look, back on Kepler, we had industrial plasma cutters that would do this exact same thing. They'd work fine until something shifted just enough to change the stress patterns, and then they'd start wearing out fast." Zilax found himself staring at the diagnostic readings with growing fascination and horror. The stress patterns were real, microscopic, barely detectable but undeniably present. The weapons were indeed suffering from accumulated microdamage that was interfering with their quantum field operations. "How did you identify this pattern in industrial equipment?" Korvax asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to genuinely curious. "Same way you identify anything that's not working right," Emma replied. "You look at it, figure out what's different from when it was working, and then you fix the thing that's different." "But how did you determine what was different?" "Industrial plasma cutters must use different diagnostic protocols." "Oh, we didn't use diagnostics. I just looked at them." Another of those profound silences fell over the armory. This time it stretched long enough for Emma to glance at the wall chronometer and frown. "You looked at them," Azila repeated very carefully. "Sure. You can usually tell when something's under stress, even if it's just a little bit. Metal gets tiny stress lines, energy flow patterns change slightly. Stuff like that." Emma shrugged as if discussing the weather. "Same with these, probably. The internal components are probably bent just enough to cause problems." "The internal components are sealed within quantum field containment systems," Korvax said slowly. "They cannot be visually inspected without complete disassembly of the weapon." "Right. But you can still tell. The energy flows different when something's not quite right." 4 minutes until deadline. Zilax made a decision that would have horrified his instructors at the Weapons Academy. "Show me," he said. Emma approached the nearest rifle with the casual confidence of someone examining a piece of familiar equipment. She didn't touch it immediately. Instead, she walked around it slowly, examining it from multiple angles with the kind of attention most people reserved for art appreciation. "Yeah, this one's definitely stressed," she said after a moment. "See how the barrel assembly doesn't quite line up with the power core housing? It's off by maybe a millimeter, but that's enough to put torque on the internal components every time it fires." Zilax activated his most sensitive measurement systems, comparing current positioning with original manufacturing specifications. Displacement variance is 0.7 millimeters on the primary axis, 0.3 millimeters on the secondary axis, well within acceptable tolerances. Acceptable for not breaking immediately, Emma corrected. Not acceptable for working indefinitely without problems. The materials are engineered to withstand. I know. Really strong materials. But look. Emma gestured toward the diagnostic display. Your scans are showing micro-deformation in the plasma channels, right? That's because the channels are being forced into slightly wrong shapes every time the weapon fires. The materials aren't failing. They're just being asked to do something they weren't designed to do. Korvax was running increasingly frantic scans, his equipment painting the weapon in layers of analytical light. The theoretical stress loads involved would require enormous forces. Even microscopic deformation of these alloys would demand. Emma reached out and gently grasped the weapon's barrel assembly. Wait! 3 voices shouted simultaneously. The containment fields, the quantum matrices, the safety protocols. But Emma had already begun to carefully, methodically adjust the barrel's position relative to the power core housing. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she were performing precision mechanical work rather than manipulating materials that were supposedly stronger than starship hulls. The diagnostic readings went insane. Stress indicators that had been hovering in yellow caution ranges plummeted toward green optimal readings. Quantum field alignment parameters that had shown subtle variations suddenly stabilized into perfect symmetry. Impossible, Korvax whispered, his manipulators frozen over control surfaces that were displaying readouts that shouldn't exist. The force required to adjust those components, the precision necessary to align quantum field generators without complete disassembly. Emma finished her adjustments and stepped back, wiping her hands on her maintenance uniform. There. That should work better now. Xilax activated the weapon with nerveless manipulators. The power core blazed to life with brilliant azure light. The targeting matrix engaged flawlessly, and the plasma confinement chambers hummed with perfect stability. Every reading showed optimal performance. Better than optimal, actually. The weapon was performing above factory specifications. How? The word escaped Vexthul's vocal apparatus as barely more than a whisper. Just bent it back into the right shape, Emma replied matter-of-factly. The internal components were stressed because they were being forced out of alignment. Once you remove the stress, everything works like it's supposed to. You bent neo-titanium quantum-reinforced alloys. By hand. Well, yeah. I mean, they weren't bent very much. Just needed a little adjustment. Xilax was staring at the diagnostic readings with the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been casually invalidated. The weapon's performance parameters were not just restored, they were perfect. More than perfect. The quantum field alignments were so precise that they exceeded theoretical mathematical models. The materials science indicates that the force required to achieve those adjustments would be... Korvax's voice trailed off as he ran calculations on his personal diagnostic array. The industrial equipment necessary to perform such precise mechanical manipulation would require specialized facilities and... Or, you could just do it by hand, Emma interrupted gently. I mean, if you can tell what needs adjusting. 2 minutes until deadline. Emma was already moving toward the second weapon, examining it with the same casual attention she had given the first. This one's got similar problems, but the stress is concentrated in the targeting assembly instead of the barrel. Should be easy enough to fix. And she did fix it. With the same deliberate hand movements, the same impossible precision, the same complete disregard for materials science that said what she was doing should require industrial-level force application and precision manufacturing equipment. The second weapon blazed to life with perfect performance readings. Then the third. The fourth. Each adjustment took her less than 2 minutes, and each weapon emerged from her attention performing better than factory specifications suggested was possible. Azila found her voice first. This is impossible. The principles governing material deformation, the force calculations, the precision requirements, none of this should be possible. What do you mean, should be possible? Emma asked, now working on the 7th weapon. It's happening right in front of you. But the physics work exactly like they're supposed to, Emma finished. You just had equipment that was a little out of alignment. Now it's not. Zilaks realized he was watching the complete invalidation of everything he thought he understood about materials, force, and precision engineering. Emma's little adjustments were being performed on materials that should have required massive industrial equipment to reshape. Yet she was doing it by hand with casual confidence. Human, physiological capabilities were documented as significantly below our own, Korvac said faintly. Muscle density, bone structure, neural coordination. All the data indicates that humans should be physically weaker than most spacefaring species. Emma paused in her work on the 8th weapon. Weaker? Really? The comparative analysis was quite comprehensive, Vexthul confirmed numbly. Humans were classified as physically fragile, suitable primarily for intellectual tasks and light manual labor. Huh. Emma seemed to consider this as she completed her adjustments on the 8th weapon. That's weird. I mean, back on Earth, this would be pretty normal maintenance work. Nothing special about it. Normal maintenance work, Azila repeated slowly. Sure. I mean, you have to know what you're doing, but it's not like it's difficult or anything. 12 weapons, all functioning perfectly. 12 impossible demonstrations of casual strength and precision that violated every documented principle of materials science and force mechanics that their civilization had developed over thousands of years of technological advancement. Emma glanced at the chronometer. Looks like you'll make your deadline. The weapons should work fine now, as long as nothing else shifts them out of position. She was already gathering her tools, preparing to return to her originally scheduled maintenance tasks, as if she hadn't just casually shattered the foundational assumptions of an entire technological civilization's understanding of physics and engineering. The officer candidates arrived 30 seconds before deadline, expecting to find a facility in crisis. Instead, they discovered weapons performing at efficiency levels that exceeded anything they had experienced during their 3 years of training. The advanced combat protocols that were supposed to challenge them to their limits became almost routine exercises when supported by perfectly calibrated equipment. Zilaks watched the training session through the observation windows, his mind still struggling to process what he had witnessed. 12 weapons that had been impossible to repair through conventional methods, restored to better than factory performance by a maintenance worker who had treated the entire crisis as a minor scheduling inconvenience. I've reviewed the recording 17 times, Korvac announced from his position at the diagnostic station. The force calculations remain impossible. The precision demonstrated exceeds our most advanced manufacturing capabilities. Yet the results are undeniable. Maybe our assumptions about force requirements are wrong, Azila suggested quietly. Maybe the materials aren't as resistant to manipulation as we believed. I ran material stress tests after the human completed her work, Vexthul replied, his voice hollow with incomprehension. The neo-titanium alloys retain all their documented strength characteristics. They should still require industrial-level force application for any significant deformation. Yet somehow, a human did it by hand. Zilaks finished. A human whose species was classified as physically inferior to our own. Through the observation window, they could see Emma working on the ventilation system that had brought her to the armory in the first place. She had removed an access panel and was examining the internal mechanisms with the same casual attention she had given their advanced weapons. As they watched, she reached into the mechanism and began making adjustments. Adjustments that involved bending metal components that should have required specialized tools. "We need to contact the Comparative Species Analysis Division," Azila said slowly. "The documentation on human physical capabilities appears to be incomplete." Incomplete, Korvax agreed numbly. That's certainly one way to describe it. Emma finished her work on the ventilation system, replaced the access panel, and made a notation on her work order tablet. The environmental readings immediately showed improved efficiency throughout the armory. Another routine maintenance task, completed with the same casual competence she had demonstrated on their impossible weapon crisis. Should we ask her about the classification discrepancies?" Vexthul wondered. Zilax considered this. "What would we ask?" "Excuse me, but our comprehensive scientific analysis indicates that what we just watched you do should be physically impossible." "That's exactly what we should ask," Azila said firmly. "We need to understand how human capabilities compare to our documented analysis." They approached Emma as she was packing her tools. She looked up with the same friendly expression she had worn throughout the morning's crisis, showing no awareness that she had just shattered several fundamental scientific principles. "All done," she announced cheerfully. "The ventilation should work more efficiently now. Oh, and those weapons should stay properly aligned as long as nobody moves them during maintenance work. If they start acting up again, just give me a call." "About that," Zilax began carefully. "Our documentation on human physical capabilities suggests that the repairs you performed should have been challenging." Emma tilted her head curiously. "Challenging how?" "The materials involved are among the strongest in known space. The precision required for proper alignment typically demands specialized manufacturing equipment. Yet you accomplished both requirements manually." "Oh, that. Yeah. I guess humans are probably stronger than your documentation says. We're from what you guys call a death world, right? I mean, Earth's gravity is pretty heavy, the atmosphere is kind of corrosive, and everything's trying to kill everything else most of the time. You adapt to that kind of environment, or you don't survive long enough to develop space travel." "Adapt how?" Korvax asked, his scientific curiosity overwhelming his lingering shock. Emma shrugged, a gesture they were beginning to recognize as her default response to questions about capabilities she considered unremarkable. "Stronger bones, denser muscles, better coordination under stress. Natural selection, you know. The ones who couldn't handle heavy gravity and hostile environments didn't pass on their genes." "How much stronger?" Azila pressed. "Than what?" "Than our documentation indicates. Than other spacefaring species." Emma considered this seriously for the first time. "I honestly don't know. I mean, I know Earth's gravity is heavier than most inhabited worlds, and I know our industrial safety standards are pretty strict because our workers can accidentally break stuff that's supposed to be unbreakable. But I've never really thought about it in comparison to other species." "You accidentally break unbreakable materials?" Vexthul's voice rose half an octave. "Well, unbreakable is usually a relative term," Emma replied pragmatically. "Most things are only as strong as they need to be for their intended purpose. If you use them for something they weren't designed for, or if you apply force in ways they weren't designed to handle. The weapons you repaired are designed to withstand conditions that would destroy most starships," Korvax pointed out. "Right, but they weren't designed to handle being slowly stressed out of alignment over time. That's a different kind of problem than just don't break when shot. It's like..." Emma paused, searching for an analogy. "It's like the difference between being strong enough to lift a heavy weight once versus being strong enough to carry a medium weight all day long. Different kinds of stress require different solutions. Zilaks realized they were discussing engineering principles that their most advanced theoretical frameworks had never considered. The concept of prolonged microstress leading to performance degradation in materials designed for extreme conditions was, actually, it was brilliant and obvious and completely absent from their maintenance protocols. "We're going to need to revise our equipment maintenance procedures," he said slowly. "Probably," Emma agreed. "But hey, that's what maintenance departments are for, right? Keeping everything working properly." She glanced at her chronometer. "Speaking of which, I should probably get to my next work order. The cafeteria's food prep equipment has been making weird noises, and you really don't want to wait on fixing those problems." She headed toward the exit, then paused and looked back. "Oh, and if you want to understand human capabilities better, you might want to talk to the humans in your engineering divisions. I bet they've been solving impossible problems for you guys all along. You just didn't realize they were impossible." After she left, the armory fell into contemplative silence. Through the observation windows, they could see the officer candidates completing their training exercises with weapons that performed better than theoretical perfection, maintained by a maintenance worker who considered materials science violations to be routine Tuesday morning work. "We're going to need to completely restructure our understanding of human integration in technical divisions," Azila said finally. "We're going to need to restructure our understanding of humans, period," Vexthul corrected. "If their routine maintenance work includes casually performing engineering feats that we considered impossible, what else have they been doing that we assumed was impossible?" Korvax wondered aloud. Zilaks was already pulling up personnel files, cross-referencing human employees with technical problem resolution statistics. The patterns that emerged were interesting. Human staff members consistently achieved maintenance and repair success rates that significantly exceeded their documented training and the theoretical capabilities of their assigned equipment. Problems that had been classified as unsolvable pending equipment replacement were routinely resolved when human technicians were assigned to investigate. Equipment that should have failed catastrophically instead continued operating well beyond projected service life when maintained by human personnel. "They've been doing this all along," he realized. "We just didn't understand what we were seeing." The implications stretched far beyond weapons maintenance. Every human technical employee in their facility, potentially every human in their entire spacefaring civilization, had been casually exceeding what their hosts considered the fundamental limitations of physics and engineering, and they had apparently assumed this was perfectly normal. "I need to contact the Admiralty," Azila announced. "This has strategic implications that extend far beyond training facility operations." "Strategic implications?" Vexthul asked. "If humans can routinely perform impossible engineering tasks, what else might they be capable of? What other assumptions about their limitations might be completely wrong?" Zilaks nodded slowly, still watching the perfect performance readings from weapons that should have required complete replacement rather than simple realignment. "We've been thinking of humans as our junior partners in space exploration and development." "Maybe," Azila said quietly, "we should start thinking of them as our teachers instead." Through the facility's communication system, they could hear Emma's cheerful voice as she contacted the cafeteria kitchen. "Hi, this is maintenance. I'm here about the food prep equipment that's been making noise." "Yeah, I can probably fix that. Most of those industrial units just need a little adjustment when they start acting up." The three aliens exchanged looks that spoke volumes about their rapidly evolving understanding of what constituted a little adjustment in human maintenance terminology. "I'm writing a formal recommendation," Zilaks announced. that all critical equipment maintenance protocols be reviewed and revised to incorporate human technical approaches. Whatever they're doing, it works better than our methods. And I'm recommending immediate review of all human capability assessments," Korvax added. "If our fundamental assumptions about their physical limitations are this far off baseline, ... The question," Azila said thoughtfully, "is whether this is uniquely Emma, or whether all humans from their death world possess similar capabilities." From the cafeteria, they could hear the sound of what was undoubtedly heavy industrial equipment being manually repositioned, followed by Emma's satisfied, "There we go. Should work fine now." "I think," Zilax said slowly, "we're about to find out that humans have been quietly revolutionizing our entire understanding of what's possible in engineering and maintenance. And they probably think we already knew." The morning's impossible crisis had been resolved in the most routine possible manner by someone who considered bending military-grade alloys to be standard maintenance work. As the implications of that reality began to sink in, the three aliens realized they weren't just looking at a simple case of misunderstanding human capabilities. They were looking at the complete transformation of their civilization's approach to technology, engineering, and the fundamental limits of what could be accomplished with the right combination of knowledge, skill, and the casual application of what humans apparently considered normal physical strength. And somewhere in the facility, Emma Johnson was probably fixing something else that their best engineers had classified as impossible to repair, while wondering what was taking them so long to figure out such simple solutions to such obvious problems.